All right, so in this lesson, we're going to be adding some fun little animating deformers for our clothes. You might be wondering why we are adding animations this early on. And it's not like we're going to do some manual animation. It's mostly just going to be some like looping deformers. And the reason why I want to add them this early on is basically they will change the shape of our clothing pretty drastically, which means that it might affect our design decisions later down the line. So that's kind of why I want to add them in this early on. And it's also really fun to see things move, so why not? So we'll go ahead and hop into Cinema 4D and get started doing that. So, as I mentioned, we are going to create these kind of movements using some really handy deformers. And as I said previously, we kind of want this like wavy wind motion going on our poncho. And luckily enough, there is a deformer called a wind deformer. So we will be using ourselves of that. So at first, I'll just come up and close down these arm symmetries since we're not going to be working with this currently. And I'll come down here to our poncho where we have our cone. And as you can tell, while we have our cone selected, we don't get this like yellow outline. And that is because we're still in points mode. So I'll just go ahead and make sure that we are in model mode, like this. So we can start with coming over to our deformers panel and we'll click and drag over here and we'll go all the way down to the wind deformer here, like that. And we'll need to add it as a child to our cone, so I'll go ahead and do that immediately. And the wind deformer will kind of start doing its work immediately, but we'll go ahead and move it up just a bit. And I'll rotate it down like that. And I'll go ahead and scale it down just so you can kind of see what the effect is. Because right now the scale of the wind is so big, so it's just kind of skewing the entire shape. So I'll activate our scale tool, scale it all the way down to something like this, just so we can kind of see what we're doing here. And I don't want the wind to just kind of blow straight from the top down. I kind of want the wind to come from the right side and going to the left side. So I'll go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees this way. And if you actually scrub through our timeline, we can kind of see what kind of motion the wind is doing. And I think I just go ahead and tweak these parameters a bit. So I'll up the frequency to 10. So that means that our wind will be a bit faster, like this. I'll also lower the amplitude to 1. So it's a bit easier on the wind strength. And I'll change the size to 11, which is a value that I think works for this. Yeah. And as you can see, currently the wind is just still kind of going just straight from the top down. So I naturally want to angle this wind motion. So if I just take the Z rotation axis here and just rotate it just a bit like this and kind of play it through, we'll see now that this is kind of the effect that we want to achieve. And I'll also move the center axis over to our right a bit. So the starting position of the wind is a bit more offset, so it's not just coming from the middle of our cone. So something like this will work. So we can actually go ahead and play this pressing the play button just to kind of see how this feels. Yeah, I think that's feeling really nice. And once I'm finished playing, I'll just make sure that our timeline cursor here is placed at frame 0, and you can also just go ahead and press go to start, which will set it to frame 0. But yeah, as you can tell, the animation is kind of skewing parts of the poncho that we don't want to be affected by the wind deformer. So naturally, we'll want to add some kind of fall off that will kind of subtract the parts of the poncho that we don't want the deformer to be affecting. So the system in Cinema 4D to do this kind of stuff is called fields. And we'll create a field attached to our wind by coming into the wind deformer and then coming into fields here. And the first button here available is called a linear field, which is what we will be using. So we'll go ahead and create that. And just to kind of show you what it's doing, I'll move it from the wind deformer, release it under the cone instead, because I want the coordinates to be zeroed out so it's aligned straight to the scene and not angled like the wind deformer. So I just set this to 0, 0, 90 degrees, and we can go ahead and scale it down. So I'll activate scale tool and just scale it down to somewhere around here. So if I just drag this up and down, if I just drag it up and down, you can see what we're doing. So anything placed above this line won't get affected by the wind deformer, and then it kind of transitions into this part of the field where everything beneath this line will be fully affected by the wind deformer. And so yeah, if you just drag this up and down, you'll see what this is doing. I'll kind of want to place this somewhere around here, I think, and we'll kind of just have to play and drag this around just to kind of see what we're happy with. But I want some minor deforming going on just around the sleeves, so nothing too much, but I don't want too much of the poncho to feel completely stiff either. But I think I'll leave it somewhere around here. So minus 0.6 centimeters in the Y and around 15 centimeters in the length of the field. So I think something like that is a place where I'm happy at. And like we did with the deformer, we can actually filter the fields out. So I'll come over to the filter panel here and I'll just deactivate fields here. Great. And like previously, they are visible once you click them, so don't be scared about that. So I'll just go ahead and play this and just let it play for a bit. I think we can rotate the wind actually just a tiny bit more. Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah, perfect. I like that a lot. Maybe the wind can also be, because right now it's just blowing from straight from right to left. But if I want to kind of rotate the wind so it's kind of coming like just a bit from behind the character, so you can kind of look at the angle between these two dots here. That's kind of the angle that the wind will travel along. So I'll set it to somewhere around here. So yeah, I think that's looking really nice. And once we're happy with that, I'll just go ahead and press pause here. And I'll actually want to add some secondary motion to this, so even more deformation. And the wind deformer will be pretty uniform. It will kind of just do this. It will kind of just do this wavy motion that we've just done. But if I want to add some like irregularities and stuff in the movement, that's not something that the wind deformer is going to give us. So I will actually add a second deformer, which is called a displacer. And I'll kind of show you what that does instead of just explaining it. But we'll come over to our deformer panel. We'll find the displacer almost at the bottom here. I'll release on that and we'll add it as a child to our cone. And it won't really do anything until we add a source for the displacer to displace with. And we'll do that by heading off to shading. And we'll add a noise, is what it's called. It's just a bunch of math that will eventually generate a black and white image, and then the displacer kind of channels the black and white parts of the image. So, for example, black will be pushed in and the whites will be pushed out, for example. So we'll be generating the displacement using these kind of mathematically generated imagery. So once I've added the noise, I'll click and come into it, because right now it's a bit too small. It's making our poncho look very wrinkly. But I'll kind of scale up the global scale here to somewhere around here. And we can actually go ahead and turn on the animation speed. So I'll set this to 1.5 and we'll see what that does to our movement. Oops. And this is doing something pretty interesting, I think. But like with the wind deformer, this kind of displaces our entire poncho. And since we have a field already deployed, we can actually just use this field on the displacer as well. So I'll just select the displacer, head into fields, and we'll just drag this in. Nice, perfect. So now we're kind of getting that secondary motion from our displacer as well. I think it's displacing a bit too much, so I'll just lower the height here from 10 to 5. So it's not kind of just completely taking over our wind motion. But this is something that I'm a bit more happy with. And if I just let this play, we're kind of seeing that this part feels very stiff now. And this is because the linear field is cutting all of the motion off beyond this point. So I'll kind of just scale this up just a bit and you see what it does if I move it up just a tiny bit like that. Yeah, that's looking really decent. And as you probably heard previously, I mentioned that this animation is going to loop. And looping basically just means that the first frame of the sequence and the last frame of the sequence is identical. So you don't have this kind of popping happening in the animation once you go from the end to the beginning. So if I just go back and forth between end and beginning, you can see now that if I play this animation and start it from the beginning again, it won't have a seamless loop. So to do that with these two deformers, the displacer is actually super simple to do that. So the first thing that we can do is just actually deactivate the wind deformer so we can just focus on the displacer. So I'll just deactivate this, come into our displacer, and we'll go into shading and then the noise again. And I'll just kind of play this along as we are editing this. So The first thing that we need to keep track of is how many seconds we have in our time range here. So the default frame rate in our animation settings in Cinema is usually 30 frames per second. So I'll just go into our project settings, which I hit Control or Command D to come into. And if you can't manage to do that, you can just come up to Edit and then Project Settings. And here we'll see under time that our frame rate is set to 30. Later down the line, we will change this, but we'll keep it at 30 for now just to make things a bit easier for you. So 90 frames in our time range basically means 3 seconds. So 30 times 3 is 3 seconds. Eventually, I will want our animation to be 6 seconds long because that's the length of the animation that we'll be doing. So we can actually set this frame range to 6 seconds. So that will be 6 times 30, which is 180 frames. So I'll just come over here, click and change this to 180 like that. And with that done, we know that our frame range is 6 seconds. I'll come over back into our displacer, into our noise. And here we have this value called the loop period. So loop period 1 basically means that the animation will loop each second. And if I set this to 6 now, since we have a frame range that is 6 seconds, we can go ahead and play this and see what's changed in our animation. So now we can see that our animation is actually looping in our displacer. So with that done, I'll go ahead and pause this and we'll do a similar thing for our wind deformer. So we can start by deactivating our displacer here and we'll reactivate our wind deformer. And when it comes to looping a wind deformer, there's no looping parameter like we have on our displacer, but instead you can have in mind that if your frequency is set to 10, the wind deformer will loop at every even second mark. So if you, for example, have a sequence that is 2 seconds instead of 6, it will still loop as long as it ends on an even second. So 1 second, 2 second, 5, 6, doesn't really matter as long as you have the frame range set to an even second mark. So in this case, it's 90, 120, 150, and so on. So in my case, it's 180. And this won't actually loop, and I'll explain why. So if we just play this, we can just see how it kind of shifts on this this left-hand side here. And that is because we have turbulence activated. So this adds another layer of basically noise, just what we made in our displacer, but we can't control it as much. So if we just turn off this layer of turbulence and set that to 0, that will sort of change our animation just a bit, but it won't do anything to our overall look of the animation. So if we play it now, you can actually see that it does seamlessly loop. So with that done, I'll actually go ahead and reactivate our displacer so we can kind of see all of this together. And yeah, it's looking exactly like we wanted to. Perfect. And with that done, I'll actually want to add another deformer that will kind of bend our poncho a bit, because since we have so much wind and stuff coming from the right hand side to the left, naturally the whole shape of our poncho will be kind of shifted towards the left. And to do that, I'll go ahead and add one of our trusted deformers called the bend deformer. So I'll go ahead and add that. I'll drag it into the cone. I'll set it to fit to parent. It will be in the wrong direction, so I'll set it to -y, set fit to parent again. It doesn't really bend the way that I want because it's extending it. So due to that, we need to click keep length here. And I don't want to bend it too much. I don't want it to occasionally clip into her shoes. So I'll just set it to somewhere around like -11 or something like that. So with that done, I'll just go ahead and play and see how it looks. I feel like this feels natural. And the order of the deformers that you place here are kind of important. If you were to place the bend deformer at the bottom, that means that everything that happens before the bend deformer, so the displacer and the wind, will actually be bent. So if we have the bend at the bottom, that basically means that the first layer of deformation is done by the displacer, and then the wind, and then the bend. So if I were to, for example, bend this like crazy, you would kind of see how all of our wind effects are getting bent. But if I drop it at the top, you can now see that the direction of the wind is still intact. So now the bend is the first layer of deformation, and then the displacer, and then the wind, and so on. And that's kind of how it works. In Cinema 4D, it works from top to bottom, which kind of makes sense. So I'll just turn that back to -11. Perfect. With that, I think we can move on to the next lesson, where we'll be adding some nice details to our clothing. So I'll see you over there.